Training camp begins in less than a week for Miami, but with so many familiar faces on the roster, what can we really expect? We rank which players have the most approved next week on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Heat training camp is less than a week away, so we're going to take a look at some of the players who have the most to prove in training camp and in the preseason. Generally, David, I think the two biggest questions facing the Heat during this period, overall health and who ends up in the starting lineup. And I'm sure we're going to sort of touch on those themes as we get into some of these players. But you and I have our different lists. We ranked our players with the most to prove to among the players that have something to prove, like most to prove to least having to prove, but still a certain amount of proviness. Let's just jump right in. On your list, who is the player who has the most to prove in training camp?
I went with the rookie, Kel'el Ware. I think we saw last year what it was like to get Jaime Jaquez, who was probably a much more ready to play player than Kel'el is, but he was generating buzz. He was making an impact. And sure enough, he did have his moments throughout the preseason, and he was certainly a great player throughout the regular season and postseason as well. He had his moments there. And I think there's a lot of expectations attached to Ware as a rookie, a guy who can come in and change the dynamic of the team, whether it's emerging as a quality backup or maybe even challenging for a starting spot, adding a level of verticality and athleticism and size that Miami has been lacking in the past. A young player. I don't think that there's anybody on this roster who has more to prove than he does, because, I mean, we'll get into it. And I know your name is different than mine, but when you look at the veterans on this roster, training camp doesn't mean, at least in my interpretation, doesn't mean as much. You're going to go through camp. You're basically assured a spot. I know you're competing, but at the same time, you're a well-established name for the most part. It's Kel'el that basically has to come in here and just have everybody take notice of who he is. And I don't know that he's capable of it. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. But when you look at what training camp is supposed to be, a place for him to emerge, to challenge, to prove that Miami made the smart and right decision in taking him in the draft, I can't say that there's anybody else who has more to prove than he does.
I had him number 2 on my list. You make a very convincing argument that he could be number 1 on the list. I have no problem with this at all. I think Kel'el Ware, and it feels weird to say a rookie has a lot to prove because you would assume like a long leash for the rookie, right? But he's competing with 2 other players for his spot, Kevin Love and Thomas Bryant. Now, maybe people roll their eyes like he's not competing with Thomas Bryant or whatever, but all these guys are on the roster, right? The Heat re-signed Kevin Love. They re-signed Thomas Bryant for a reason. They wanted to give him another chance. All these guys are competing for playing time at the same position, basically playing the backup center position behind Bam Adebayo. If Kel'el Ware just totally shows out and he looks like Karl-Anthony Towns from three-point range, and defensively he's holding up against Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Jaime Jaquez, Tyler Herro, Terry Rozier, all these guys, he could earn a spot in the starting lineup. Why not? So I think he has a ton to prove. I think that the Heat need, to your point, like the elements of his game that they don't otherwise have, the spacing, the vertical spacing, rather, like the athleticism, the height, just the rebounding that he brings, the shot blocking that he brings to the table. These are all things that the Heat just don't do, right? They don't block shots. They don't get like one-man rebounds. Everybody sort of has to box out to get rebounds. Like Kel'el Ware at least has the potential to do all those things. And so, Summer League is one thing. And I think everybody is super encouraged based on Summer League.
Right.
But you don't learn about whether or not a player can play in the NBA based solely on Summer League. He needs to do it against NBA competition, right? And the Heat, with that veteran roster, with that experienced roster, we're going to know whether or not that Kel'el Ware could play at an NBA level. Basically, I think they'll get a sense basically in training camp, because like you said, we had the sense after training camp last year, like, oh, Jaime's ready to play. Like, they're
Right.
not shy about saying these things. And if we're starting to hear those kinds of things coming out of the Bahamas next week, then
Yep.
I think Heat fans could feel really good about that. At the same time, if he doesn't prove that, it's not like the end of the world, but you'd kind of like him to earn some minutes right away.
Right. You want some of that buzz. You want him to be able to, because this is the Heat MO and has been for a long time, but it's also the purpose of training camps around the league. And it's, maybe if there was a different team with much lowered expectations that had been going through an active, long rebuild, and they took a chance on a player in the top 5 of the draft, you could be a lot more, friendly, a lot more wearing of the kid gloves and allowing them the space to kind of get their own. And I'm sure we'll hear that from teams like Atlanta or others, that took a chance on a rookie, and maybe they're a very unknown commodity, but they don't have to go out and prove it right away. With Kel'el, it's you've got to come in and find a way to make an impact on a team that internally, however realistic it may be or not, believes they can compete for a title. So you've got to earn your spot. You've got to bring something to the table, or else you're going to find yourself in a doghouse fairly quickly, and you probably aren't going to be able to climb your way out of it unless you make some incredible transcendent leap during the course of the season. Those opportunities will be limited. Again, players get better when they play, and if you can't earn a spot early on, it's going to be much more difficult to do so as the season progresses. And you've got, like, to your point, you've got quality backups on there, quality backups that they signed after they drafted Kel'el. So they knew what they had on the roster when they drafted Kel'el, and they said, yeah, we still want to bring back Kevin Love and Thomas Bryant. They weren't shy about needing to shore up that backup center position as they envision it. And that's knowing that Bam is probably going to be the starter from day one. So it's going to be an interesting test. I'm curious to hear what the coded language, because like you said, you pointed out what Jaime, the buzz he generated was very direct. It's like, oh, this kid can play. We saw him getting coached up by Kyle Lowry, just working on his low post game. I'm curious to hear what the kind of thinly veiled messaging or coded language may be if Kel'el just doesn't have it early on. It's like, oh, you can see the talent is there, something to that effect.
That
But
was
he's just
sort of
can't go out
similar
there.
to it was similar to Niko when he came in, right? Like,
Yeah,
nobody and they
yeah,
did slow play it, and that's fine. Like, Niko in his second year blossomed, right? We saw him really improve last year. Like, it's not, like I said, it's not the end of things if the guy doesn't earn playing time coming out of training camp as a rookie. But even Kel'el Ware, for as raw as he is, does feel a little bit more polished, a little bit more NBA ready than Nikola Jovic did when he was drafted, just because
yes.
he does bring an NBA skill right away, which is being 7 foot tall. I mean, that's right away. He's going to be 7 foot tall. So it's
Can't teach height. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So you'd like him to maybe be closer. He's not going to be Jaime. He's not going to be Jaime. Like, that is not a fair expectation of him, right? But he needs to be closer on the Jaime on the spectrum to Jaime than Niko in terms of readiness. And that's at least,
Yes.
if you're a Heat fan, what you're hoping to hear. Number one on my list, and this is a really simple one. Terry Rozier is number one on my list in terms of players who have something to prove. And it just comes down to health. This goes back to our conversation the other day, David. Like, is he really ready to play 5-on-5? Is he going to stay ready to play 5-on-5? Is there going to be a setback with his health and all these things? I need him fully engaged in training camp, right? We just got news from the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard, like, he's going to be working in training camp on strengthening his knee. Now, granted, Kawhi Leonard and his injury history is very different than Terry Rozier's. But, like, a lot of these players kind of walk into training camp not ready to play 5-on-5, not ready to participate fully. And we saw this last year in the last few years, like, when health, like, it just kind of sets you back. And if Terry Rozier is projected as the starting point guard, you just don't want any setbacks, especially at that position where Rozier is talking about, hey, I want to get on the court with these guys, really go through a full training camp, build some camaraderie and chemistry and all these things. Well, that becomes difficult if there's a setback with his health. And so for me, that it just comes down fully to that. Terry Rozier, just prove that you're healthy and that this neck thing is behind you.
He's a little further down in my list, and I can share with that in the next segment, I think, when I talk about him as far as where he reaches my hierarchy. But I see the points you're making in terms of you want him to be available and to stay available, because I think so much of this Heat ceiling depends on what he's capable of bringing to the table. And I don't know that we saw the full Terry Rozier game last season in his limited opportunities in Miami. Sure, he played more than a handful of games, but it was either him
But
adjusting,
never with the projected
figuring
starting
out.
five, right? Like, it was
Yeah,
like we
yeah,
haven't seen him with everybody. Yeah,
right.
I mean, we can get into it, but yeah, I mean, it's you're absolutely right. And like, the ceiling kind of is on Rozier, but also just the general health of the team. And so I just thought about, like, what's my biggest question going into training camp more than anything? The thing that I need the biggest takeaway from, and is Terry Rozier ready to play? Because even if you're cleared for 5-on-5, it doesn't mean you're ready to play.
Right.
Like, those are two different things. So that's just the biggest thing I had. But we can get into Terry Rozier and some of the other names we have on our list after this on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook for lots of reasons. And when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go check out other stats. You know, the latest stats are updated all the time. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Look, I know you're probably watching the Dolphins game. You're probably going to get frustrated over the next couple of weeks. Why not go onto FanDuel's site and go look out what some of the other players around the league and the numbers they're putting up, because it's been an impressive season thus far, albeit not necessarily in Miami. But you could get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure to go to FanDuel.com today. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen for the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. Who's next on your list, David?
On my next on my list is actually Tyler Herro. And for all the reasons that I think you mentioned with Terry, and I know it feels like maybe year 2 of doing this, maybe even year 3 of kind of putting Tyler on the spot. And I know it's a difficult place for him to be, but again, if you're looking at how far this team could go, a lot of it depends on that backcourt. And Tyler, whether he's coming off the bench or whether he's starting, and I know there's a lot of debate about that, and I think he'll start. I think some people are reading into Udonis Haslem's recent comments about Tyler and his evaluation that he may be a bench player. I know that's what a lot of people hope. I know there's a growing frustration in the fan base, but I think we're kind of, even still, overlooking the kind of player he is. Maybe he's not great, and maybe he'll never reach greatness. That's all very possible. But he's proven himself in 5 seasons to be an NBA quality player. It's just not the same level that a lot of people had hoped he'd be, and that includes the fans and the front office. So he has to come in here now and kind of take over a little bit. We don't know what's going to happen with Jimmy Butler in his future. Bam Adebayo is the leader of this team emotionally and perhaps even statistically, and at the same time, he needs a running mate. And I don't know who that is, and I don't think the team knows who that is just yet. But if you're looking to the future of this team and the young core, then Tyler is at the head of that particular snake. And I think he has so much to prove in terms of being able to just be the leader in that training camp. Be one of the guys. Like at this point now, look, after that first season in the bubble, there was no training camp. It was a very shortened offseason, no time to prepare, etc. Then you get swept by the Bucks. He's coming off of injury. He's got to come back and figure it out. And then it's a retooled team with Kyle Lowry, who's obviously a veteran and a proven leader, and PJ Tucker, same thing. And then Tyler kind of has to fit into the shadows. Then, PJ leaves, Kyle's still there, and there's this idea, after winning 6th Man of the Year, what's Tyler's role going to be? Is Tyler kind of, bristle with some of the other players in that locker room, maybe some of the other veteran players? And then now here we are, he's entering this season, and it's such a pivotal point in his career. And he needs to, in my opinion, just he doesn't have as much to prove, because I think we already know who Tyler is. But at the same time, he has a lot to prove in terms of being able to be one of the proven vets on this team and willing to accept that role and have it fall on him. Like, I don't think he's shy about that. I don't think he's necessarily had that opportunity either, but I'd like to see him come away from this training camp with the knowledge that I belong here. I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to do everything I can to help carry this team. And at some points, even carry this team like as an individual. Like, he has to be the guy who says, you know what, get on my shoulders. I'll carry us to a win. So I'm curious to see whether or not that's something we're going to see develop over the first week of training camp.
It's a good call out that we're not in the Tyler Herro is the young guy with necessarily something to prove anymore, or to prove that he's deserves a spot in the NBA anymore. Like, we're past Tyler Herro young guy now. We're very much in, hey, Tyler Herro, you're kind of one of the longest tenured guys on this roster now. You're kind of a leader on this team, especially when you consider what has happened on the roster sort of underneath him with the roster churn. There's a lot of young guys on this team that are going to be looking to Tyler for as a former first round pick, end of lottery pick, who carved out a role in the NBA and carved out a major spot within this Heat's franchise, right? And it's going to be kind of upon him, right? Kyle Lowry is not there anymore. Terry Rozier has been in the NBA longer than Tyler Herro, but not on the Heat longer than Tyler Herro, right? Herro's sort of the leader right now in that backcourt. And so I will want to see how he's carrying himself in that way. Also, I had Tyler Herro on my list a little bit lower. The weight gain thing. Like, I think we'll know, like, by weigh-in, like, that matters too. You talk about this all the time with Tyler Herro. Like, can you get to the line a little bit more? Can you be a little bit more physical at the rim, lean into guys, draw fouls, all these things? Well, we're gonna know whether or not that weight gain is real when basically they weigh in on day one. And I think that's just something that Tyler Herro has to prove. Hey, is this just Instagram photos, or did you actually put on muscle? Like, what's actually going on here? So that's going to be something to prove too. But I had Tyler Herro a little bit lower on my list because I do think we just know who he is. But he, again, like, he's on my list. He does have something to prove. So what happens if Eric Spoelstra comes out in the Bahamas at Bahamar and says, hey, listen, here's what I'm thinking for my starting five. It's fluid, but here's what I'm thinking. Tyler Herro's going to the bench.
Ooh.
That is a testing moment for Tyler Herro, right?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we've seen this go bad before. I don't know how Tyler will react, and I don't think anybody does. I don't think Tyler expects it, and that's not just the ego that's necessary to be an NBA player, but it's just
he views himself as a starter. He's been very open about that. Yeah. Even when he was coming off the bench last year, coming from the injury, he called himself the sixth starter. And by the way, Eric Spoelstra did too. Like, everybody kind of has that language around it.
Sure.
But whatever. Like, you were coming off the bench. You were not in the starting five.
Right. So I think,
and he did embrace it back then. I should say, like, he was very, like, team friendly about it at that moment.
It was very different though. It's like you don't want to overturn the apple cart as you're heading into the playoffs. You've got Terry on this roster. He's trying to figure out his way. All these different reasons. This is different. You're going to training camp, and if somebody usurps you, or if the coaching staff just lacks faith in your ability to have progressed or taken your game to another level, and they just say, you know what, we know the buck has stopped. You're limited in what you can do. And in that limited capacity, your best place on this roster is coming off the bench. So it's a huge testing moment for him, whether or not he accepts that role, whether or not he says, nah, I'm not here for that. Trade me. Or makes a big stink of it. It could be a very, contemptuous moment.
Like what we saw last year with Kyle Lowry, right?
I don't think that was necessarily... Yeah, I think he proclaimed himself the starter, but I don't think he made things difficult in a way that I could envision Tyler as a young player still trying to carve out his career.
I don't think Eric Spoelstra enjoyed Kyle Lowry publicly telling reporters, "Oh, I'm the starting point guard."
But he also earned it.
Did he?
But he also earned it. Who was the other option? Josh?
He may have earned it. I think he earned it at one point, but he didn't earn it day one. I think that was a process that Eric Spoelstra wanted to go through without the media being involved. But
I think Kyle was. He thought he was the starter. He emerged as a starter. He earned it. To me, it was a lot different than Tyler going into camp going, hell yeah, I'm going to start. And then day two being like, hell no, you're not coming off the bench now. And then him saying, oh, okay, no, to hell with this. I don't want this. This is not what I signed up for. I'm a young player looking to establish myself, establish my legacy, establish my brand, all the other things that you can look into from a young player. And being a bench player on a team that has, struggled during the regular season, he might not see that role as something that he can. Or I don't know that he's necessarily going to not.
He might. Like, he might embrace it, right? And that's why he's on the list. It's in terms of things to prove. And by the way, we have no idea if this is going to be a conversation. Eric Spoelstra might just say, "No, Tyler Herro's starting. I don't care."
Duh.
And, yeah, exactly. So, you started the last 2 years. What are we even talking about? But Tyler Herro, I think, does have something to prove. I didn't have him as high on my list. My next guy was Jaime Jaquez.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Going into your second year, I think that there's a lot of competition at power forward, or for that fifth starting spot, maybe, or whatever it is. I think there's a lot of competition generally on this roster for somebody to step up. And Jaime can fill so many different places because he's versatile enough, and his size is just like enough where he can kind of fill in three different spots, right? You could put him sort of anywhere on the perimeter or even at power forward. But that three-point shot and his defense needs to come along in a major way. 32% from three last year, not good. His one-on-one defense was per basketball index like an F last year. And by the way, the eye test bore that out. He got schooled by some players last year one-on-one. Team defender, he's better. One-on-one, there's a lot that he needs to prove on that end. So I just think that in training camp, they're going to want to see year-over-year growth, right? We saw him a little bit in Summer League on the ball, kind of being more engaged defensively and things like that. But again, Summer League is Summer League, and we barely saw it. What does he look like going into year 2? Because as impressive as he was as a rookie, there is a clock on him now. Like this improvement, like you don't get to just take, like we always say young players improvement isn't linear. When you're 24 years old, it better be. Like you better be getting better every single year because at some point you plateau, right? Before we know it, Jaime is going to be 27. He doesn't have a whole lot of years to just get better. He doesn't have like a long leash here the way that Nikola Jovic or Kel'el Ware does. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on a rookie of his age. Like the clock is ticking already. He needs to get better in a major way. Like pretty much every single year. And the two spots that everybody's looking at, obviously, are the 3-point shot and his one-on-one defense. Let's put a pin in this conversation for now. We'll carry it over into the next segment and then get into the rest of our players who need something to prove.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time's got a new feature for you. It's called Game Time Picks, and it makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier, whether it's concerts, games, comedy shows, whatever you're looking to get tickets for. Game Time Picks will filter out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats that you're looking for, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And it's such a convenient thing. You just want to find the tickets you're getting and you want to know what you're going to pay for them. Well, guess what? With their all-in pricing feature, you know exactly what you're getting up front. No surprise fees at checkout. You can get their seat views so you know exactly where you're going to be sitting in a venue maybe you've never been to. Let's say you're traveling to another city for work or for vacation and you go, hey, let's check out, whatever, a game there. And you want to go check it out. He's like, I don't know where we're sitting. I don't know what the best place for it is. Well, guess what? You'll see exactly where you're going to be sitting when you buy those tickets for Game Time. And their lowest price guarantee, again, they'll credit you 110% of the difference if you can find a different price. So make sure to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. And you get $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but you create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. The best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Tell me why I'm wrong about Jaime Jaquez being this high on my list, David.
He's not on my list at all, and I'll make that clear right away. I just think it's, in terms of proving, I think he's such a much more ready-made player, and he was such a good player last year that while I think there's definitely opportunity for him to grow, that feels more ancillary than anything else. Like I think he's going to come into camp and at the very least be exactly the same player he was last year, and most likely be even better. So to me, when you're looking at him in a scale of having to prove something or show out that you're completely different, I think the expectation for him is tempered. I think it's high. And at the same time, I think he'll meet those expectations at some point because his game was so polished and further along. There's very little variance, in my opinion, to Jaime's game. He's going to come in there. He's going to give you your 20 and 5. He's going to come in and make an impact. Yes, there are areas, as you pointed out, that he can improve on: the 3-point shot, the rebounding, the defense, all those things certainly that he can grow and develop. And I think he personally will. At the same time, I think there's room for that, and you kind of just accept who he is and know, you know what, it's almost like a veteran, like a well-established veteran in that sense to me. And I know the comp has been made before, but it's just, he'll come in there, and I think he's still going to show up guys. Like, I mean, he's going to be able to get his layups as he spins in the lane over Kel'el Ware. Like, he's going to be able to get his buckets over Bam.
He has to be better. He has to get better.
Yes.
And I just think that the window for him to improve to who he is as a player is shorter than a normal second-year player.
Maybe, but I think he will be better. But I think it's also marginally better because, again, is he going to come into this camp and be like show up as an all-star player? Probably not.
No.
That takes a much more refined and gradual process. So the levels of which he'll develop or show that he's better are probably going to manifest. And as such, just to me, I just don't think he has enough to prove.
Fair enough.
That's
we got
just
to pick up the pace to kind of get through this list, though. So who's next on yours?
I've got Rozier as my third name on my list.
Okay, so
and
tell
for
me
all the reasons you mentioned. I think he's got to be able to show again that you took a chance on me for a good reason, that I could be the Terry Rozier of old. You have Annie Ellsberg saying this was our offseason acquisition. We just did it at the trade deadline. I mean, you're a huge investment. You're a huge upgrade, at least over what Kyle Lowry wasn't able to provide at the end of his tenure in Miami. You've got to be able to do it consistently and prove again that you're a starter or that you're something of quality, of worth to this Miami Heat offense, because they desperately need an infusion of some scoring. And if that's what you provide best, better than anybody else, then you've got to go out there and show it. So I think, to me, he's got a lot more to prove than most of the other guys in this roster.
So I got a couple more guys here on my list.
Okay.
I I had a hard time kind of placing Jovic.
He's fourth on my list.
Okay, so I have him right around there. We've talked a lot about Niko, I feel like, over the last couple of weeks in terms of proving the physicality and stuff. But the part here in training camp, there is so many people coming for his spot in that starting lineup, right? He is the incumbent starting power forward. They draft Kel'el Ware. There's questions about whether or not you could start Kel'el and Bam as your front court. Maybe Bam takes his spot as sort of the starting power forward. Jaime Jaquez could be coming for that fifth starting spot. Haywood Highsmith, who was re-signed, could come for that starting job. There's just a lot of people coming for Niko's job, and it's on him to keep them away, right? He's going to have to basically re-earn this starting power forward spot, which is, and I don't mean this as disrespect to Niko, he kind of got the starting power forward job last year by default. There were no other power forwards on the roster, and he played well. And I thought there was a lot of good things, right? I mean, no disrespect by that. He embraced it, and he was starting in playoff games for a reason. But now there's people coming for his job, and that's what's at stake for him.
It's a great point. It's, going into year two, especially after such a lackluster rookie season where he didn't really play, really didn't get much of an opportunity, and they advanced all the way to the NBA Finals with him not being a factor at all. Coming into the second season and a strong showing at FIBA, it's like, okay, what's he going to bring now? And what's he going to do in order to kind of show this Heat coaching staff that he can earn some minutes? Well, earning minutes isn't no longer the issue now. Now it's maintaining your starting role, and that's such a big leap. It's being able to, again, like you said, stave off the competition. I'm the one that makes this first five the best five. I'm the one that stretches the floor. I'm the one that picks up the pace in a way that you can't do it or you can't do it. And I'm earning the spot, and I'm continuing to grow. See, the way I kind of put it with Jaime is that I think Jaime, older as he is, he's not going to grow as much. I think the growth is going to be much more incremental over the year after year over the course of his career. With Niko, he's going into this really crucial period of his development where he has to be able to show that he's grown his game to huge leaps and bounds. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's likely, but I think that's the expectation is you've got to be able to show that you can be consistently good. And then as such, then maybe you'll earn this spot. And if you can't do that, then you're right. It's very much an open competition.
Who else do you have on your list?
I've got Haywood Highsmith.
So do I.
Everybody that talks about this team and talks about the team did over the offseason, they mentioned Highsmith. We brought back Haywood. We brought back Haywood. There's expectations that he's going to fill a big role. Again, last year it was like, oh, well, we saw some nice minutes from Haywood in the playoffs where he kind of shut down Jason Tatum, or maybe he had a couple good plays, hit a nice shot here and there in the finals. That's all fine and good. You earned more minutes. You were a sometime starter. We went out of our way to re-sign you. I know the market dried up in a way that you weren't expecting it to, and maybe you were going to leave in free agency anyway, but you chose this. You chose to sign here. Maybe another deal would have eventually presented itself, but you wanted to come back to Miami to stay here for 2 years and continue to prove that you're a quality player. Well, this is where it starts. You continue to develop. You show that that three-point shot is reliable, that 40% mark last season wasn't a fluke. And, of course, continue to bring defense at a high level and maybe even challenge for a spot, whether it's the 2 or the 4 or somewhere in between, who knows. But he has to be able to prove that he can be a damn good player on this roster, and I think that's where it starts at camp.
Caleb's minutes are vacated.
Yeah.
Haywood Highsmith is the obvious one next in line to take those minutes. It doesn't mean he's taking those minutes. He's got to earn those minutes. Jaime Jaquez is coming for those minutes. And Nasir Little, who they just signed, could potentially compete for those minutes. Josh Richardson, Keyshawn Johnson on the two-way contract. There's a lot. Pella Larson, the second-round pick. There's guys coming for those minutes. Haywood Highsmith is not guaranteed those minutes. And so I agree. He was obviously lower on my list, but he's got to prove, to your point, the three-point shooting is real, that the defense is going to be there. But can you be enough of a factor offensively? And also, I think there needs to be improvement, too, with him.
Right.
Being a quicker decision maker, being more of a threat to pass and get guys involved, not just always being the play finisher, but being able to be more of a cog in the offense than I think he's been. I think is going to go a long way for him. The other 2 guys I had on my list, and I don't know, do you have anybody else on your list?
No, I just made it.
Okay, so I just had 2 more guys, and it's very Nasir Little's on my list. He just, for obvious
Ooh.
reasons, non-guaranteed contract, just sort of has to prove that he's worth keeping on the roster. That's it. We've talked enough about Nasir Little, but that's basically it. And then Drew Smith for a similar way. Like, he needs to just prove that he deserves that final two-way contract because, first of all, he has to prove that he's healthy, and then he has to prove that he's worth keeping on that two-way. Because if he's not, then the Heat can obviously swap that out, and that would be maybe another move that they could make. But those are just the other two guys I had, to a much lesser degree, obviously.
Yeah, I think all the two-way guys almost to the same degree have as much to prove.
Yeah,
just
totally
because,
fair. Yeah,
it's you're not guaranteed anything. It's a two-way
right.
deal. It can be rescinded right away or changed, etc. So you want to be able to go in there and make a name for yourself, establish yourself, and there'll be unfortunately there'll be some guys that'll just wind up after the first week or two basically unemployed, and they just won't be able to have carved out a niche for themselves. They won't be able to have done anything of note or stand out in any way. And in Drew's case, he might not be 100% back from injury. I like that he went with Terry Rozier to a recent Marlins game, and I like that he was part of that same group there. So that was good to see that there's some camaraderie behind the scenes. I think he's well liked. For everybody that kind of just looks at Drew and says, "Oh, what's he even on the roster for?" Well, I mean, he's an NBA player. He is. He's just maybe not a great one at this point in time, but I think he's well liked, and I think he's appreciated for his effort. And he's coming back from a hell of an injury, and it wasn't really his fault either.
Yeah.
That Cavs court really took away a big chance for him to make the most out of that season. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out for him. But we'll see what he does, because maybe he comes in and surprises everybody. And he's like, you know what? I'm back. I'm healthy, and I'm the point guard on this roster. I'm the guy who's going to earn minutes. And if that's the case,
that would be very surprising if he was pushing.
It would, wouldn't it?
Terry Rozier, but no. But to your point, there's a need for depth at that position too. And Drew Smith got minutes before getting hurt in Cleveland. Like, this is not a guy who was outside of the rotation and just got hurt in some random practice or whatever. Like, this is a guy who did get some minutes for them last year, and some of that was due to injury, but whatever. Like, we expect more injuries to happen. So, and then obviously the training camp guys on the Exhibit 10 deals, Isaiah Stevens, Zion Pullen, like, they need to prove that they deserve to be a part of the developmental program in the G League and things like that. But that's not necessarily impactful to the Heat this season. So training camp less than a week away. Very excited to get to that. Media Day is on Monday. We're obviously going to have content from you straight from Media Day from Kaseya Center, and obviously a bunch more for the rest of this week. So for now, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.